Sometimes there's nothing better than curling up on the couch and indulging in the thrill of being scared. One thing that terrifies a lot of people is toy dolls. From Chucky to the boy, there's just something unsettling about a blank expression and a pair of lifeless glass eyes. But perhaps the most popular of these creepy dolls right now is Annabelle, especially since she's based on a true story, and it's possibly even more terrifying than the movie. Before we dive into the real story, let's start with what we know from The Conjuring, 2013. The movie opens with a spooky tale about a porcelain doll given to a student nurse, which begins to behave oddly, moving around on its own and getting progressively scarier. But, as it turns out, the real-life story behind Annabelle has some pretty big differences. For one, the real Annabelle looks nothing like the creepy doll from the movie. In fact, the real doll is a Raggedy Ann. Yes, one of those soft, floppy, innocent-looking dolls with red yarn hair. It's not something you'd expect to be haunted. Back in 1970, a woman bought this Raggedy Ann doll as a birthday gift for her 28-year-old daughter, Deidre, although some sources refer to her as Donna. It was a nostalgic gift, possibly reminding Deidre of her childhood, but little did she know, this gift would become the center of a terrifying paranormal experience. Deidre, a student nurse living with her roommate, started noticing strange things shortly after receiving the doll. Initially, the doll would move slightly, perhaps just changing positions on the bed, but soon it was showing up in entirely different rooms. The doll's movements were subtle at first, but they quickly became more disturbing. Deidre and her roommate even claimed to see its arms move on their own. Curious, the two nurses reached out to a medium to figure out what was going on. During a seance, the medium revealed that the spirit of a little girl named Annabelle Higgins was inhabiting the doll. According to the medium, Annabelle had died near the apartment building when she was very young, and her spirit was drawn to the kindness of the two nurses. She asked if she could stay with them, and, feeling sorry for her, they agreed. This decision, as it turns out, would be a big mistake.
At first, everything seemed innocent enough. The nurses treated Annabelle like a part of their home, even going so far as to dress her up in clothes and bracelets. But as time went on, Annabelle's presence became more sinister. The atmosphere in the apartment grew darker. The nurses began hearing strange noises, knocking sounds, whispers they couldn't explain, and their apartment would suddenly feel freezing cold. Then, one night, they returned home from work to find Annabelle standing upright in the hallway, waiting for them. Keep in mind, this was a floppy rag doll with soft limbs, so it should have been impossible for her to stand on her own. One of the nurse's boyfriends, who was skeptical of the doll from the beginning, suggested they get rid of it. He even went as far as to say they should burn it. But that night, after making this suggestion, he had a terrifying nightmare in which Annabelle was floating above him, trying to strangle him. When he woke up, he threw the doll across the room in a panic, only to suddenly find scratches all over his body. Things escalated quickly. The nurses started finding mysterious notes written on parchment paper, asking for help. The eerie part? None of them owned parchment paper. And then they found small drops of what looked like blood on Annabelle's hands and chest. That was the final straw. Realizing they were in over their heads, the nurses turned to their local Catholic church for help. The priest they consulted knew of a couple who specialized in dealing with supernatural occurrences, Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens were well-known paranormal investigators and had founded the New England Society for Psychic Research. By the time they were contacted about Annabelle, they had already investigated numerous hauntings and possessions. They interviewed the nurses and quickly realized the doll wasn't just a haunted object, it was being used by a demonic force. According to the Warrens, no human spirit, especially not a child's, would inhabit a doll. Instead, they believed a demon was posing as the spirit of Annabelle in order to gain the nurses' trust. The Warrens knew that the situation was dangerous, so they performed an exorcism to cleanse the apartment. However, they couldn't leave the doll behind. It was too powerful, so they took Annabelle with them. The drive back to the Warrens' home was anything but peaceful. Their car repeatedly broke down, and it wasn't until Ed Warren doused the doll in holy water that they were able to make it home safely. But even in the Warrens' possession, Annabelle continued to wreak havoc. Ed claimed to have seen the doll levitate and move on its own. So to contain the malevolent force, they locked Annabelle in a special glass case in their Museum of Haunted Artifacts, where she remains to this day. Yet, Annabelle's terror didn't stop. The Warrens Museum saw its fair share of strange occurrences, including a near-fatal accident involving a priest who mocked the doll. After throwing Annabelle across the room, the priest was involved in a severe car accident. He survived, but the last thing he remembered before the crash was Annabelle's eerie face. In another chilling incident, a college student visiting the museum laughed at Annabelle and dared her to harm him. Just hours later, he was killed in a motorcycle accident, and his girlfriend, who was with him, was seriously injured. Annabelle is just one of the many cases the Warrens handled during their long careers. They also investigated other famous hauntings, such as the Amityville Horror in 1975 and the Enfield Poltergeist in 1977. Both cases became well known and were adapted into movies. The Amityville case involved an evil presence terrorizing a family in their dream home, forcing them to flee after just 28 days. The Enfield Poltergeist case took place in a London suburb where two sisters and their family were tormented by a spirit that moved furniture, made eerie noises, and even possessed one of the girls. But while these stories are compelling, not everyone believes in the supernatural. Skeptics point out that many of the Warrens' cases had few verifiable witnesses, and some of the people involved have remained anonymous, making it difficult to prove anything conclusively. The nurses who first owned Annabelle, for example, have never publicly confirmed their story. Whether you believe in Annabelle or not, the story has undeniably inspired some of the scariest movies in modern horror. With advances in technology and deepfake videos, it's getting harder to tell what's real and what's not. But one thing's for sure, Annabelle has left a lasting legacy as one of the most notorious haunted objects in history. So, what do you think? Is there any truth behind Annabelle's story, or is it just an elaborate hoax? Have you ever had a spooky experience of your own? Let me know your thoughts.